Honestly, it's getting harder and harder to ignore what's happening in NASCAR right now. If you've been following the sport closely lately, you can probably feel it too. Something feels different. There's this growing tension around the garage area, not just because of bad finishes or frustrating weekends, but because it feels like major changes are coming. Careers are starting to reach crossroads. Teams are feeling pressure, and some of the biggest names in the sport suddenly don't look as untouchable as they once did. And today, there are two huge storylines shaking up the NASCAR world that are connected in a way nobody expected. The entire conversation right now centers around one massive question: what actually comes next for Kyle Busch? Because when you really stop and think about it, this situation still feels unreal. We're talking about Kyle Busch, a two-time Cup Series champion, one of the greatest drivers NASCAR has ever seen, and a guy who spent nearly 2 decades making winning look easy. But now, suddenly, Busch finds himself trapped in something fans never imagined they'd see from him: a 100-race winless streak. And honestly, that number sounds shocking when you say it out loud. When Busch left Joe Gibbs Racing after the 2022 season and joined Richard Childress Racing to drive the number 8 Chevrolet, it looked like a fresh start that was going to completely revive his career. Early in 2023, that's exactly what happened too. Busch won quickly at Auto Club Speedway, then grabbed another victory not long after, and suddenly it felt like Kyle Busch was officially back competing for championships again. Fans thought the comeback story was already happening, but then everything suddenly stopped. Since the middle of 2023, the wins completely disappeared. Nothing through the rest of 2023. Nothing in 2024. Nothing in 2025. And now, several races into 2026, Busch still hasn't found victory lane again. What makes this even more surprising is how dramatic the decline has looked statistically. This isn't just a few unlucky races or a small dip in performance. Through the opening part of the season, Busch is sitting deep in the standings with no top 8 finishes and barely any momentum at all. For a driver who built his reputation on consistency, dominance, and weekly speed, this kind of stretch feels completely unfamiliar. In fact, even during the toughest periods earlier in his career, Busch had never experienced anything close to this level of struggle. And when you step back and look at the bigger picture, things start feeling even heavier. His incredible streak of winning at least one race every single season ended recently. He missed the playoffs for consecutive years. And now fans are beginning to ask uncomfortable questions they never thought they would ask about Kyle Busch. Is this just a rough chapter, or are we actually watching the beginning of the end? The reason this conversation has become so intense is because Busch is now in a contract year with Richard Childress Racing, and suddenly his future in the Cup Series doesn't feel guaranteed anymore. Busch turns 41 soon, and while age alone doesn't automatically end careers in NASCAR, performance absolutely matters. We've seen veteran drivers stay competitive deep into their 40s before, so nobody's saying Busch can't still win races. The bigger issue is whether Richard Childress Racing can actually provide him with the speed needed to compete at the level fans expect from him. Because if we're being honest, RCR hasn't consistently looked like a top-tier powerhouse organization for quite a while now, even before Busch joined the team. That's why so many fans are split on this situation. Some people believe Busch still has plenty left in the tank, but simply doesn't have the equipment anymore. Others think the pressure, frustration, and years of intensity may finally be catching up with him. Either way, NASCAR moves fast, and this upcoming silly season suddenly feels like it could become one of the biggest in years. And honestly, the timing makes this even more fascinating because Busch now heads into Bristol Motor Speedway, one of the greatest tracks of his career. Bristol has always been one of Kyle Busch's strongest places, a track where he's dominated multiple times and built some of the most iconic moments of his career. If there's any place where Busch can suddenly flip the entire narrative and remind everybody who he is, it's probably Bristol. But at the same time, the pressure surrounding this weekend feels enormous. Fans are watching closely because this race suddenly feels bigger than just another stop on the schedule. It feels like a test of whether Busch still has another major comeback left in him. Now this is where the conversation gets really interesting, because if Kyle Busch and Richard Childress Racing eventually decide to part ways, where could he realistically go next? There are already several possibilities being discussed around the NASCAR world. One option is obviously staying at RCR and trying to work through the struggles together. While that currently feels unlikely to many fans, it's still possible if the team starts showing progress later in the season. Another option getting a lot of attention is Spire Motorsports, and honestly that connection makes a lot of sense. Busch already has a relationship with Spire through the Truck Series after selling Kyle Busch Motorsports, and there's already chemistry between both sides. With his son Brexton Busch continuing to rise through racing, some fans believe Spire could offer a long-term situation that makes sense for both family and competition reasons. Then there's the possibility that sounds almost unbelievable, a return to Hendrick Motorsports. It sounds crazy at first, but NASCAR has taught fans never to completely rule anything out. Busch originally started his Cup career with Hendrick Motorsports over 20 years ago, and depending on future decisions surrounding drivers like Alex Bowman, some fans believe a veteran move could become possible. Add in the existing sponsorship relationship between Hendrick Cars, Com and Busch in the Truck Series, and suddenly people start connecting dots very quickly. There's also growing discussion around Legacy Motor Club because of its Toyota connection and future expansion plans. With legends like Jimmy Johnson and Richard Petty involved in the organization, some fans think Busch could become an interesting fit there if Toyota wants another proven veteran leader in the lineup. And finally, there's the possibility many fans don't even want to think about yet, stepping away from the Cup Series entirely. Not retiring from racing completely, because Busch has made it clear he still loves competing, especially in the Truck Series, but possibly moving away from full-time Cup competition if the right opportunity doesn't appear. And honestly, that's what makes this whole conversation emotional for NASCAR fans. This isn't just about a winless streak anymore. This is about the future of one of the defining drivers of an entire generation. Is this the beginning of the end, or is this simply setting up one final comeback story? Personally, I'm still not ready to count Kyle Busch out. But at the same time, I'd be lying if I said this situation doesn't feel very different from anything we've seen before.